welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 315 of the podcast. And on this episode, I am talking about the American League Central Division of Major League Baseball. Last season, the American League Central was without a doubt the worst division in all of baseball, with two teams, the Kansas City Royals and the Chicago White Sox, that both lost over 100 ball games, and only one team that finished over 500, the Minnesota Twins. This season so far, yes, it's only June, but it's been a different story. As of now, it's the only division in all of baseball with three teams above 500. The Cleveland Guardians at 40-21, the Kansas City Royals at 37-26, and the Minnesota Twins at 33-28. And you also have the Detroit Tigers, who are at 500. I thought now would be a good time to talk about the teams in the AL Central, except for the lowly White Sox. Let's start with the leaders of the pack, the Cleveland Guardians, who I thought would take a big step back due to the fact they lost longtime manager Terry Francona. But that has not been the case, and it starts with their great third baseman, Jose Ramirez, who is first in baseball with 60 RBIs, fourth in home runs with 17, and fourth in runs with 47. I just think this guy is an all-time player who doesn't get enough credit for how good he's been. He's going to the Hall of Fame, and I personally believe now is a good time to give him the MVP award. I would also like to add he's on one of the most team-friendly contracts in the history of baseball. It's called the Most Valuable Player Award, and nobody is more valuable to their team than Jose Ramirez is to the Cleveland Guardians. He is the anchor of their offense. He's also really good defensively. And he's not their only good offensive player. They also have Josh Naylor and a secret weapon out of the bullpen, Emmanuel Clase, who is arguably the best relief pitcher in baseball. Cleveland is a baseball team I've always admired. They just have quality season after quality season. They are going to make the postseason and could possibly make some real noise. And this is a team that's historically known for developing superstar players like Manny Ramirez and Jim Thome, and then losing those players to bigger franchises like the Red Sox and like the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, just recently they traded Francisco Lindor to the New York Mets, and the Guardians just keep having success. I mean, they've been better than the Mets since making that trade. They just have their superstar, Jose Ramirez, and they're going to continue to be the Cleveland Guardians that we're used to. That team that just quietly wins 90 to 95 games and makes the postseason year after year. Next is the team with the young phenom, Bobby Witt Jr. with the Kansas City Royals. This offseason, they paid him a massive contract, and man, is he living up to that and then some. Hitting .317, fifth in MLB with 11 homers and 46 runs batted in, sixth in MLB, and 54 runs scored. That's first in all of baseball. He's a legit MVP candidate, and what I really like about the Royals is their aggressive offseason is paying off big time. Seth Lugo is off to a Cy Young caliber start with the team, with a major league leading 9 wins to go along with a 2.13 earned run average, 6th in MLB. He's also a classics innings eater with 84 innings so far. That's second in all of baseball. They also have the steady hand of future Hall of Fame catcher Salvador Perez, the last remaining member of the 2015 World Series winning team. The Royals have been really bad these past few years, and I'm glad they are good again, because I remember the time where they had Eric Hosmer, they had Lorenzo Cain, they had Salvador Perez. They were such a good team. They didn't strike out, they made solid contact, and they're back to being that team, a team that you want to watch night in and night out. Often when we talk about baseball, we always say that one player can't make a massive impact, and I think that's true in some cases, but then you look at a guy like Bobby Witt Jr. He is now fully committed to being the face of the team. He signed that long-term contract. He's not only putting up massive numbers now, but he's only going to get better. I think when you lock in a player like this, it just pumps up the fan base and the organization. You have a foundation. It's like Julio Rodriguez with the Mariners. Locking him up for the majority of his career is a brilliant move. Yes, you need really good players around Bobby Witt Jr., but having him being there year in and year out is going to get players who want to play for the Kansas City Royals, and that's not something you could have said 3 years ago. Nobody wanted to be on the Royals. Now that they know that Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be there for the next decade, free agents are going to be interested in joining the Kansas City Royals. That's why a lot of these guys sign with the Royals. That's why Michael Wacha's there. That's why Seth Lugo's there. And what I really love about the Kansas City Royals offseason is that they went after multiple free agents. In baseball, you see it all the time that a team goes after one guy and gives him $200 to $300 million. Baseball's not that kind of sport. The Royals needed to put a really good team together, and that's what they've done, and it's paying off big time. Let's move on to the Minnesota Twins. The Twins are a team that, other than Carlos Correa, lacks stars, but they have very good players. Byron Buxton is back to playing center field defensively. I mean, he's one of the all-time defensive players, but he hasn't been able to play the position in a few years due to injuries. The Twins, to me, have always been one of those teams where the manager has always been the face of the franchise, going all the way back to Ron Gardenhire. Like, you just knew year in and year out he was going to be with the team, and I have that same feeling towards Rocco Baldelli, who was manager of the year in 2019, and with the team has a record of .403 and .357. They are a team that no one talks about. They're not super exciting. You will ignore them, but then they might just make the playoffs. I'm not going to lie, they were way more exciting when I was first watching baseball because they had Joe Mauer, they had Torrey Hunter, they had Johan Santana. Like, that was a team you wanted to watch play because they had elite talent. Now they don't have that elite talent, but they're still scrapping by and making waves in the AL Central. And it was really interesting a few off seasons ago where they almost lost Carlos Correa to the Giants. Then that move didn't happen, and they ended up re-signing Correa. And I really like Carlos Correa. He was a World Series hero for the Houston Astros. He really stepped up for the Twins in the postseason. He's a really good established player. I just feel like he's a little too inconsistent during the regular season. He's not the Carlos Correa of old that could drive in 100 runs and hit 30 homers. He has up and down stretches. You watch him sometimes and you're like, why isn't this guy the best shortstop in all of baseball? It's kind of maddening. I can't quite figure it out. I think he's found a good home in Minnesota. I wonder what the injury history is going to be like in the years to come, but I like the fit between Correa and the Minnesota Twins. I do believe a reason that a lot of people ignore the Minnesota Twins, and I've had this with franchises in other sports as well. You know that they might make the postseason, but then when they make it, you also know that they have zero chance of making the World Series because of their past postseason experience. They're a team that usually loses in the division series, and most likely it's going to be to the New York Yankees. Much has been made about the fact that since 2002, the Minnesota Twins have a 44-122 record against the New York Yankees. That is atrocious. That is all-time bad. That is the Yankees decimating the Minnesota Twins. And on one hand, you can say that's really embarrassing, but it's the New York Yankees, the team that pays a lot of money for superstar players, the team that currently has the likes of Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, and Juan Soto. I mean, how are the Minnesota Twins supposed to compete with the New York Yankees? And the Twins just got swept by the Yankees, so it feels like the Yankees' dominance over the Twins is going to continue, and that's why people don't have faith in the Minnesota Twins. So they know that they're going to win a lot of regular season games, but baseball fans know not to take the Twins seriously. The Twins are the ultimate team that have to show you they can take that next step. They need to make an American League Championship Series before you give them kudos, because we've seen this from the Twins time and time again. We're no longer impressed with them just making the postseason. And finally, you have the Detroit Tigers, and this is a team this year is all about one player. starting pitcher Tariq Skubal, who is 7-1 with a 1.97 ERA. He's a favorite to win the Cy Young, and this is a franchise with a great history of starting pitching. You have Jack Morris, Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, David Price was there for a minute. I mean, they are a team who have had elite aces in their history, and Skubal has definitely become that. Now, I've been really depressed about the Detroit Tigers for a few years now because all of the talk about the Tigers for a long time had been about the aging star Miguel Cabrera. Now, I loved Miguel Cabrera. I think he's one of the best hitters in the history of baseball, but he aged really poorly at the end of his tenure with the Detroit Tigers, and all of the talk about this team had been about the goodbye tour of Miguel Cabrera, that he's their highest paid player and he's no longer very good. And that's a bad place to be if you're an organization like the Tigers, because that was a team that for a while was really exciting. They had Justin Verlander, they had Maglio Ordonez at one point, they had elite talent like Curtis Granderson, they would occasionally make the ALCS. They were a really good team, and then all the talk became about how their best player was aging, and it wasn't about young talent. It wasn't about the future of the team. It was all about his legacy. This season feels like the first that the Tigers have really moved on. They have a decent team. I don't know how good they're going to be by the end, but I do look at them and I go, this is a good place to be if you're the Detroit Tigers. We're talking about one of your star players on a regular basis. I believe by the end of this season, this division, the American League Central, will have 3 playoff teams, which is not something I thought could happen at the start of the year. But I've been impressed with these 4 teams, and I think the way the Detroit Tigers could make the playoffs is to make a big splashy trade by the deadline. What they need is an elite offensive weapon to go along with their strong pitching staff. Like, if I were the Tigers, I would 1,000% call the New York Mets about acquiring first baseman Pete Alonso. This guy has everything the Tigers are looking for. He's a power bat. Pete Alonso, year in and year out, is going to hit 35 to 45 home runs. He's not going to be a batting average guy. He's not a Gold Glover. He does one thing and one thing very well. He slugs the baseball. The Mets and Alonso feel like they're at an impasse. The Mets are not a very good baseball team. Pete Alonso is an impending free agent. I don't think the Mets are going to give him big money, and I think the Tigers need a foundation bat. That's what they're missing. Nobody in their lineup is scary. Yes, they have Javi Baez. He has not been as good as advertised. He's not the same Javi Baez he was on the Chicago Cubs. He swings at everything. He was one of my favorite players with the Chicago Cubs, but he's just not consistent offensively. And I think what has happened to Javi Baez is when he was with the Chicago Cubs, he was playing with other elite offensive players. He was playing with Anthony Rizzo. He was playing with Chris Bryant. He didn't need to be the big bat in the lineup, and the Tigers gave him $160 million to be their big bat, and it hasn't worked out for Javi Baez or the Tigers. So if I were the Tigers, I would make a push to get Pete Alonso and insert him into this lineup by the deadline and give him a 7 to 8 year contract in the $200 million range. I'm not going to break the bank for Pete Alonso, but I do think it's time for the Tigers to pay real money to a big bat, and I get it. They tried that with Javi Baez. It hasn't really worked out, but you could still get a lot out of Javi Baez if you pair him with a bat like Pete Alonso. For a long time, the Tigers were a big spending team. They paid the money with Justin Verlander. They went out and they got Prince Fielder. Now, that move might not have worked out, but at the time, that move made sense because the Tigers were trying to win a World Series. If they want to get back to that point, they need to spend money on someone, and somebody who is a big bat. That is what this team needs, and I think that name should be Pete Alonso. He makes a lot of sense for the Detroit Tigers right now. They are a team that could make a postseason run. Add Pete Alonso's bat to that lineup, and they could get ahead of the Minnesota Twins. Right now, the Tigers have only hit 58 home runs on the season. That's 24th in all of baseball. If they're going to make the postseason, that number is going to need to rise, and it's going to need to rise fast. And the way that number rises is to get a slugger like Pete Alonso. Alonso. I think this is a match made in heaven. Pete Alonso to the Detroit Tigers. I really hope it happens. I have two other names I've also really thought of when it comes to the Detroit Tigers. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. It's not working out with the Toronto Blue Jays. He cannot hit home runs in that ballpark. Get him to Comerica Park immediately. That's the big bat the Tigers need to make a playoff push. And the last name I'll bring up is third baseman Alex Bregman. The Houston Astros are probably not going to make the playoffs this year. Alex Bregman is going to be a free agent. He's not going to get paid by the Astros. So I think the Astros should move him to a team like the Tigers. Bregman has a history with the Tigers manager, A.J. Hinch. He managed him for a long time with the Astros. They won a World Series together. This makes a lot of sense. Now, I don't know if the Tigers should give Alex Bregman a lot of money, but I would give him $100 million to be my franchise third baseman for the next 5 years because I think Alex Bregman, he's a former MVP. He could bring a lot to that Tigers lineup. But the Tigers need a bat. They need that bat if they're going to be a playoff team this season. 58 home runs is not enough. Being 24th in baseball is not enough. Bring in a big slugger. From the time I've been watching baseball, the division that gets talked about the most has been the American League East, with the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the Orioles, and the Rays. But this year, the AL East has been a big disappointment outside of the Yankees and Orioles. The Blue Jays are a mess. They just released Kevin Biggio. They're not the team everyone expected them to be, despite the fact that they have Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. The Red Sox can't get it together. They're a middling 500 team that's missing a lot of their core due to injury, but they're not there. Same with the Rays. The Rays' winning formula seems like it's running out. Randy Arozarena is really struggling with the Rays. I just don't understand what's going on with that team. So at least for this season, the AL East has been overthrown by the American League Central. Again, the AL Central has 4 teams worth talking about. The Royals and Guardians are really two of the best teams in all of baseball right now. The Twins are quietly getting the job done as a team that can make a playoff push. And then you have the Detroit Tigers, who a lot of people thought were going to be bad, and they're not. For the last 5 years, this has been a division that has had a lot of bad teams. The White Sox have been bad for a while. The Royals have been bad for a while. And the Tigers have been bad for a while. And now 2 of those 3 teams are no longer bad. And I always think it's good for baseball to have parity in their divisions. Yes, I love the fact that the Braves run away with their division every single season. It's great that a team dominates a division like that, but it can be boring if that's what's going to happen. So I like when teams come out of nowhere and take their division, and I don't think anybody had the Guardians being the best team in the division, and I don't know if they're going to end being the best team in the division, because I do think the Royals are a team that's going to be aggressive at the trade deadline. I could see them being the team that ends up winning this division. I think the reason that people are ignoring the American League Central is because of the lack of star power. Bobby Witt Jr. is an emerging star. I think people are interested in him, but they're not really keeping track of his career thus far. Jose Ramirez, as I talked about earlier, is a star who's been ignored for a long time. I mean, this is a top 5 player in all of baseball. I love the fact that when he was asked about being compared to Barry Bonds, he said, "I'm better than Barry Bonds." This is a guy who's fully confident, and he's an MVP candidate. There are a lot of people who couldn't name you another member of the Minnesota Twins outside of Carlos Correa, and Tariq Skubal is having a great season with the Tigers, but he's not a big name pitcher yet. This is a division full of emerging stars, and I think in the coming years we're going to be talking about it for a long time, which is really good for baseball, because for the last 5 years this has been a division in the gutter, not really interesting to talk about. You can ignore it. It doesn't matter who wins this division, because they will not be looked at as a real World Series contender. Whoever wins the division this year, whether it's the Guardians or the Royals, I believe are legitimate World Series contenders. So far this year, I have been impressed with the teams in the American League Central, and I believe as the year goes on, these teams could get even better. This is a division worth paying attention to. This is the best division in baseball. Not the AL East, not the NL West, it's the American League Central Division. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.